Joining us now, great to welcome to our book talk segment. Man has written really an interesting book about a fascinating person in history and economics. It's called The Man Who Knew, The Life and Times of Alan Greenspan. We'll find out about him. And the author joined us today. Sebastian Mallaby is up in New York, but based over in London, lives over in London. He joined us by telephone. Sebastian, good to talk with you. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good to have a chance to chat with you for a couple of minutes. And I guess we all sort of know what Alan Greenspan looks like mostly from the kind of cryptic comments he used to make on TV when he was in charge of the Fed, but not too many people have, I guess, interviewed him or gotten really in-depth in his life, so it must have been an interesting project for you.
Right. I mean, I spent more than 70 hours talking to him, and I lost count after 70, so I did get to know him very well. I also, I did enormous amounts of archival research and kind of talking to his former girlfriends and people he worked with and so forth, and, we think we know who he is, but we don't necessarily remember that he was also the guy, who in his 30s bought the Buick Electra 225 convertible with red leather seats and enormous tail fins. I mean, there's a lot we don't know about him.
Yeah, I didn't realize till I read your book that he was a professional musician.
Yes, he was a professional musician. That's right. He toured the country with a big jazz band, and he did that. But then, while he was doing that, in the breaks between playing sets, he would be reading economic history, and he suddenly realized he wanted to be an economist and not a musician.
He had one of those types of brains, and you talk about it in the book. I guess math always kind of came easy to him, right? He sort of was always playing with numbers in his head, so somehow he knew he wanted to be involved in economics somehow. He
was, 6 or 7 years old, and his mum would make him stand up in front of the cousins, and she would say, "Hey, Alan, what's 792 plus 1,413?" And he would just shoot back the answer right like that.
Well, he looks like an economics professor. If you were going to cast one in a movie, I mean, you'd pick him, right? So he looks like that type of guy. What kind of led him into his career doing that? I know you said he was a jazz musician, but he kind of got right into that pretty early in life, didn't he? Some banking and that kind of work.
Well, he went to college, did economics, and then he emerged and started doing economic research, and he just turned out to be fantastically good at it, and more people came to see him as the man who knew. If you wanted to know what was going on in the economy, you had to go see Greenspan. Somebody said about him that, he knew how many flat-headed screws there were in the American economy and what it would do to the automobile sector if you took out 7 of them. So he just had an unbelievable grasp on the data.
And he worked for the Nixon campaign. I didn't realize that. I probably had heard that somewhere, but he worked for Richard Nixon in '68 and also in '72, didn't he? Part of the administration. That's
the other thing which is extraordinary about Greenspan. We think of him as an economist, and he was that. He was also a mesmerizing politician, very, very up to his eyeballs in political tactics. So he advised Nixon initially on economics, but actually quickly he became also the polling analyst, and he advised on messaging and spin, and he was willing to get involved in some, slightly dirty tricks with the with the Nixon team at one point. They leaked a story about the Fed chairman to make him look bad in public, and then they got Greenspan to go see him and coax him into cutting interest rates so Nixon could be re-elected. So Greenspan did all kinds of political stuff, and I think that's first of all that's the sort of forgotten story about him. It's also the key to why he was such a fantastically successful Fed chairman until the end. He was both a brilliant economist, but he also knew how to operate in Washington.
Yeah, he also was a childhood friend or high school friend of Henry Kissinger, who was part of the Nixon administration, right? They knew each other.
They both went to the same high school, that's right.
Yeah.
And then they had a bit of a rivalry in the Ford administration. And the great thing about the 1970s is that people had invented the tape recorder and the Xerox machine, but they hadn't yet figured out that it was dangerous, because if you made all these copies, this historians like me would come find it someday. And so, Kissinger's phone calls were sometimes recorded. So I could reconstruct this amazing battle he had with Greenspan, where they disagreed about something about how to deal with the oil markets. And at one point, Kissinger gets completely furious. He said, that Greenspan, he only has half a brain. And then he says, why is there this negative story about me in the press? And Kissinger says, Kissinger's deputy tells him, well, that's Greenspan leaking about you. So, Greenspan was full of, cunning political tricks, leaking to the press, going around people's backs. When there was talk in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was the presidential nominee for the Republican Party, there was talk of putting Gerald Ford on the ticket as vice president. It was Greenspan who tried to negotiate that extraordinary deal.
Yeah, I know they were talking at one point, remember the conventions, like a co-presidency almost between Reagan and Ford. That was the
That's
thought
right, yeah. Crazy idea.
Yeah, that didn't pan out. But now, to become chairman of the Fed, was that an appointed position? Was he appointed by one of the presidents?
Ronald Reagan appointed him.
Reagan did, right.
And he did that because Greenspan seemed like a very loyal Republican. And that shows again Greenspan's political skills, his political side. It didn't necessarily work out like that for the Republicans. Once he was in office, Greenspan showed he could be tough and independent.
Yeah, whenever you heard him make those talks in there, it never quite made sense unless you're really into economics. He never really tried to say too much. I guess it would affect the markets, but he had to be careful how he spoke in public, didn't he?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when I went to see him in private, when I was doing the research for this book, over 5 years, I would talk to him, and he was pretty clear to me. I think he was unclear in public because it was a way of avoiding questions he didn't want to have to answer.
Right.
And so, some people compared him to a bespectacled sea squid who, sensing danger, emits black ink and then glides away silently.
Did you get the impression he had a good sense of humor when you talked to him? Or what was he like?
Yeah, he had a lovely kind of dry sense of humor, which you don't necessarily see in public, but it's very charming in private.
And the personal life you get into a little bit. I guess most people know he's married to Andrea Mitchell, but he was married previously and then was single for a long time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was not against marriage, as you say. He did it twice, but he was single between the age of 27 and 71, which is a pretty unusual formula.
But he went out with a lot of different women. He dated, but some famous women too.
Yeah.
So he enjoyed himself, I would think.
He was a man about town. He told me that he dated senators, beauty queens, news anchors, and most in between.
Right.
Barbara Walters was somebody he dated for 10 years, and she was the kind of the beauty of TV news at the time. So, he didn't necessarily just, stay by himself in his apartment all alone.
And of course, you go into it heavily in the book. We won't do too much now, but the 2008, the crisis, the crash, whatever you want to call it, he was heavily, criticized, I guess, by many for that. But did you get the impression after talking to him that he regretted anything that he did at that point, or how did he feel about it?
He has to have some regrets, right? More than anybody in American public life, he went from being the maestro who everybody worshipped to being the villain blamed for the crisis. He went from hero to zero faster than anybody else in American life that I can think of. Now, does he regret it? Of course he regrets it. Was it really a mistake? That's a difficult one because it depends, based on what he knew then, he would say maybe he made the right choices. My argument, the book is called The Man Who Knew. I think he knew about financial instability. He knew about subprime being dangerous, and therefore he should have done more.
Well, it's an intricate story of what happened, and as economics are, but it's a fascinating book about Alan Greenspan. Again, The Man Who Knew, The Life and Times of Alan Greenspan. We've been talking with Sebastian Mallaby today. And Sebastian, you have a website you can give out? People get more information about the book, are you?
Sure. The book is called The Man Who Knew, The Life and Times of Alan Greenspan, and that would be available on Amazon.com or any bookstore you want to go to. And then if you want to find me, if you Google my name, Sebastian Mallaby, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm at the Council on Foreign Relations, a think tank in New York, and there's a website for that,
Great. Sebastian, pleasure talking to you. I know you're on a busy book tour, but thanks for taking a couple of minutes with us, and hopefully we can talk to you again.
Wonderful. Great talking with you.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles Media.